General, congratulations to you, sir, and your family for your decades of exceptional service. I look forward to supporting your swift reconfirmation. I wanted to turn to an issue that you and I have talked a lot about in the NDAA. I had a provision in there this year that talked about our FONOPS policy and how we should be looking at regular, routine, and if possible, with allies. So in some ways, our FONOPS, particularly in the South China Sea, are no longer newsworthy. Can you elaborate a bit on the department's FONOPS policy and if this differs from the previous administration? For example, it was reported that Admiral Harris essentially had to get individual FONOPS approved by the NSC one at a time under the Obama administration. What's the strategy right now under the Trump administration, and how does that differ?
No, Senator, thanks. That is a good question. Secretary Mattis, when he came in early February, we went to him with a couple of individual freedom of navigation operations that you spoke about, and he said, "Hey, look, how about give me a full strategy that lays this thing out now for a long period of time and talks about the strategic effect we're trying to achieve." You spoke about partners. You talk about being routine and regular. And so those are the things that Secretary Mattis directed. After that, Admiral Harris developed a long-term plan for freedom of navigation operations, and that's what we're implementing right now as a strategic approach to freedom of navigation operations that does, in fact, support our overall strategy in the Pacific as well as the specific mission, which is to ensure that we fly, sail, and operate wherever international law allows, and we continue to validate those claims where we see international airspace, for that matter, or the maritime domain. So
those are going well, regular, routine, with our allies if possible, not micromanaged from the NSC?
That's right. And Senator, in candor, we still and always will take into account what else is happening in the strategic environment, whether it's a UN General Assembly or some other event. But we do have a base plan from which we're operating right now in a healthy dialogue, I believe, between the commander and the Secretary of Defense.
Let me turn to missile defense. You've had a lot of questions today. I think is it safe to say that the administration views a much more robust missile defense as a key part of our strategy with regard to North Korea or Iran? With regard to rogue nations like those two countries that are trying to acquire intercontinental ballistic nuclear missiles?
No question, Senator.
So you mentioned the NDAA does a lot. We do, but I think there's more that we should be doing. Does the administration have plans to, at least from a supplemental perspective or working with the Congress, beefing up our missile defense? I think it's something we all agree, it's very bipartisan, by the way, that we need to be doing. What are more specifics, General, you could share with us on what we need to be doing, and how can Congress support you?
Sure. Senator, we did do exactly as you suggest, and we've submitted it. And if you don't have a copy of that, I'll make sure you get one. But we looked at additional radar systems. We looked at THAAD systems, Patriot systems. As you know, in the NDAA, there's additional interceptors, additional 21, I think is the number that I recall, that are in there. All of those issues are part of it. We did an immediate kind of supplemental, for, just as your suggestion, for ballistic missile defense. I think it was maybe the first or second week of August to make sure it was in time for the budget cycle. So I think what you have outlined in the NDAA, combined with the supplemental that the administration has put together, will meet the immediate needs. But of course, we need a long-term strategic approach to ballistic missile defense, and buying the same capabilities that we have today into the future is not going to be the solution as the threat adapts. And I know you've received some of the classified briefings on the adaptations of the threat, which means our ballistic missile defense capabilities also have to adapt.
Well, we want to work with you on that. I think it's an area, like I said, of bipartisan cooperation in the Congress, which is new but important development, and we want to work with the administration on that. Let me end just a final question. I really want to applaud you and General Mattis, the entire administration, Secretary Tillerson, on the North Korea strategy. I think what you're trying to achieve, your focus on it, importantly, your frequent and constructive engagement with Congress, asking us to play our part, have also been very, very an important element of that strategy. I also believe that you talk a lot about credible military options, and that, to me, is an effective element of our diplomacy. effective diplomacy, which I think we're starting to see a lot of progress in that realm. If one of the options was a preemptive or preventive ground war on the Korean Peninsula, like the Gulf War in 1990 or 2003 that was launched by the U.S., my view is that would require an AUMF from the Congress, and constitutionally and politically, this would help our policy with regard to leverage, with regard to the ability to show the world that the American people were behind that. Do you agree with that? And is that something that the administration has started to talk about? I've raised it with a number of folks. I think it's an important issue. We want to be supportive. I think you're getting bipartisan support for what the strategy is, but that kind of issue to me is something that we need to be prepared to discuss. Do you have a view on that, General?
Senator, I think what I do is probably narrow my view to the scenario you're describing. I would want to have the full-throated support of the American people in the form of the Congress if we did something like you're suggesting.
Right, and I use that language very carefully. I know the President has a lot of authority to react, to take action, particularly if we're attacked, but I'm talking about a ground war a la 1950, launched by the United States, although in 1950, as you know, there was no congressional authorization. I think that's an important topic. I think it gives us leverage, and I'm glad to see that you believe that for something like that, you would want that. And I don't want to put words in your mouth.
No,
it's an important
Senator,
issue.
I think again, we know from history that we are going to be much better degree of success if we have the full-throated support of the American people when we go to war. What you're suggesting is going to war. And,
Correct.
And if we're going to conduct a major war, then having the full support of the American people in the form of the Congress, I think, is something we need to have.
Thank you. Thank you, General.
On behalf